So first up, we've got Mark Arundell from Sky Metals. He'll be talking about their project in New South Wales and the value in the shallow. So thank you, Mark, for your time.
All good, Jess?
Perfect.
Sorry. Let us kick it off. Corporate disclaimer. I thought I'd kick off with a slide just to tell you a little bit about who Sky is, because Sky hasn't been around that long. It actually listed on the ASX in July last year, the 1st of July. It originally started off as a tin company, and it sort of has morphed into a gold company over the last couple of months, thanks to largely to a JV with Heron Resources. The company is actually trading above 37 cents at the moment. Someone told me earlier today that we'd actually passed 40 for the first time. So we've got a market cap over 100 million, which is pretty significant for an exploration company. Partly, I think, due to the quality of the project, the Cullerin project we've got, and I also hope a bit of a recognition of the, dare we say, length of grey hair on the board. Combined between Norm, the chairman, Remus, Richard and myself, we've got over 140 years, I think, about it, of experience working in the mineral industry, which hopefully is going to be showing through. So what does Sky do? Well, as I mentioned, originally it started off as a tin company. These days our main focus is gold. Specifically, we're looking for large-scale McPhillamy style gold, if you like, VMS related or VMS. And the word shallow, I suppose, is one of the big things we would like to emphasise. We're not into porphyry exploration. There's a number of other people are in New South Wales, and we are looking in what I will classify later on in the value of the shallow. In the top 100 metres is where we're targeting most of our exploration. And the drilling that we did late last year, early this year, intersected some significant minerals from about, significant gold mineralisation from about 56 metres downhole, 93 metres, just over 4 grams, including an intersection of 4 at 20 at the Cullerin project. Cullerin's located about 80 k's north of Canberra, but besides that, we have 2 other projects that we're looking to drill in the not too distant future. Kingiera, which is about 20 odd k's north of Yass, and the Caledonian project, which is about 20 k's south of Yass. So where are the projects? As I mentioned, Caledonian's about the 80 k's north of Canberra. It's along what we consider to be part of the same major bounding structure that hosts the McPhillamy deposit, which is labelled on that diagram there as the Godolphin Cullerin fault zone. The McPhillamy itself is about 69 million tonnes, about a gram, currently going through permitting with Regis Resources, and I think they're hopeful that they might be able to kick off their production in the not too distant future. We've got Remus on the board, who was actually involved in the initial discovery of McPhillamys, who's an absolute delight to work with and also a font of knowledge. A lot of the projects that we have developed within Sky Metals came from Peter Durden, who's now with Magmatic Resources, who led Sky for the first 6 months after it listed. And Peter was instrumental in bringing the Cullerin project into the company. Myself, I showed Jess my 1988 Prospector Supplies belt earlier, which I'm not going to flash up again. But I've had over 20 odd years operational experience here in New South Wales, and was involved in listing a junior company at Oakland Resources, which was exploring for McPhillamy style deposits a number of years ago. The major project, or if you like our flagship project, is the Cullerin project and the Hume target, which is a joint venture with Heron Resources. I is currently earning 80% into that project. And what I'll talk about later is the base metal focus of this exploration. And basically what we're searching for, the McPhillamy style, has been largely unrecognised. However, when you actually go back through the work that was done in the project, you can actually find some decent intersections of about 150 metres at just under a gram from some historic drilling in the area, which did contain some notable high-grade intersections. 14 to 15 metres at about 5 grams is pretty lazy, I think. So the first thing that Sky did was drill 2 core holes, pretty much to verify the previous work and the results that have come through there. Hole 1 has been pretty much overshadowed by the results of hole 2, but it's not exactly shabby. 5 metres at 6 grams, which should get anyone actually interested or excited. But when the neighbouring holes actually hit 93 at 4, that tends to actually pale into insignificance. Hole 1's about 200 metres south of hole 2. However, it does show that the mineralisation does actually have some striking extent with it. We're currently in a phase of drilling at the Hume target, and probably will be for at least another couple of weeks in that area. However, we've also been doing some soil sampling and geological mapping in the area. We're fortunate in quite a bit of the area the rocks actually stick out of the ground. So in the area of where we've been drilling, you can see the location of hole 1 and hole 2 down in the left-hand side of that figure in through there. We've announced that we've completed hole 3 and hole 4, one to test the updip potential of mineralisation intersected in hole 2, and hole 4 is drilled up to the north about 80 to 100 metres. We've also been very fortunate that a lot of the historic drilling, and as I mentioned, a lot of that was purely done for base metals. All of that core has ended up at the Londonderry core shed of the New South Wales Mines Department. And one of the drill holes, hole 15, with the historic intersection was about 12 metres at 2 grams. And there's a comment on the report when they did that they actually had a mineralisation they'd identified in that drill hole that they didn't actually cut. And that has remained uncut for 34 years, which we managed to cut as we pulled the core out of the core shed. And we've expanded that particular intersection to 17 metres at about 1.7, within a zone now that is actually just under 50 metres at just under a gram. And that's hole 15. Hole 21 was a bit of an opportunistic hole that we decided to actually sample. And what that's come up with is some really interesting distal parphite and geochemistry, hopefully pointing us back to where the gold mineralisation is. The holes there as well, DB1 and DB2, have been quite useful for actually evaluating the soil anomaly that we generated from work that we've done in the area as well. You can also note on that diagram that there's a huge number of little red spots in that area. They're all the other historic drill holes that are housed within the Londonderry core shed. If we were actually able to operate there at the moment, because they're on a COVID lockdown, we'd be probably back there with the 3 core saws that we had going before we actually got picked out. We've identified roughly about 5,000 metres of core that we're going to be able to cut at Londonderry, and most of that has never been analysed for gold before. So I mentioned that the Cullerin project, or Hume project, target, the area that we're actually drilling is down in the southern end in through here. There's the soil anomaly in through there. And what we can see in that potassium radiometric image on the left is that we've got this right sort of targeted football alteration that we're after, trending for about 4 k's north-south. And that's actually coincident with a zone of low magnetics, which we interpret to be magnetite destructive alteration. We've completed geological mapping over that area. We've done some soil sampling over part of it. And as we've mentioned, we're partway through actually evaluating the core in that area. But that's not the end of the story in the Cullerin project. I could say, but wait, there's more. And these are the steak knives. The Hamilton target is another 3 k's of similar radiometric response and low magnetics with some encouraging geochemistry from historical soil sampling in the area. And there's also another target, Arundell, which is further to the north. So overall, we've got about 20 k's of strike length to test in the Cullerin project area. So taking a bit of a step back to look at geology, one of the things that really fascinates me is how things are actually found, or how things are discovered and why things aren't necessarily discovered. This is one of the original geology work that was done in the area by Gould, who did a PhD. He completed that in about 1974. He identified a basement of Ordovician sandstones and siltstones, and then the late Silurian felsic volcanic sequence, which was considered to be analogous to what was present at Woodlawn and Captain's Flat. He defined 2 units there, the Clear Valley beds and the Cooper Creek dacite, and that was overlain by some fine-grained sediments, late Silurian in age as well. The base metal mineralisation was considered to be stratiform, stratabound, and confined to pretty much the contact between the Cooper Creek and the Clear Valley beds. The sequence was considered to be tightly folded into a syncline, and that syncline actually appears to be doubly plunging, northwards from about where the Hume Highway is, and southwards from Arundell. And as I said, he basically considered it to be similar to the Captain's Flat syncline, which hosts Captain's Flat and Woodlawn. The Geological Survey came along at about 25 years later and came up with a different story. They renamed the dacite, and the Silurian and Ordovician sediments actually became part of the Silurian Canvas group. The syncline or synform became an antiform, and also a couple of the faults actually went for a bit of a walk. The Lake George fault, which Gould had interpreted to be to the western side of the block, is now on the eastern side of the block. The Currawang fault that he recognised, Gould recognised, has now disappeared from the map. So where does that leave us? Well, you can see the geology may be a little bit of a mess. But if we go through the previous exploration, that sort of gives us a bit of a setting to where people were thinking and what actually happened. So in the late 60s, the Woodlawn deposit was discovered. It was in the early 70s that continental exploration came to the area and worked the area for about 4 years. North Broken Hill entered the area in about 1976, and they were looking for base metal mineralisations on the stratabound model. In the late 1970s, Woodlawn commenced production as an open cut, and North Broken Hill were busily drilling in the area, following up some auger lead zinc anomalies in the area of Wet Lagoon, and some of that was actually based on a mercury survey that was done in the area. In '84, a new company came into the area, Marathon Petroleum, as a joint venture into the area. And their share was taken over in 1985. And that was about when things changed from the base metal focus to the gold focus. But that actually happened fairly slowly. And the impetus for that was the proposed highway deviation. So, sometimes people go out and drill holes based on speculative geology. Well, these guys did sampling of the old drill holes based on the fact that a highway was going to be built in the area. And one of the samples that they took from WL18 came back with 1.1 grams of gold, which they thought might actually be worth further investigation. 12 months later, Panos resampled a number of the WL or Wet Lagoon holes and came back with an intersection of 10 metres at 3 grams in hole 17. And as I mentioned, that 12 metres at 2 in hole 15, and some reasonable gold in some of the other drill holes as well. And at that time, the gold mineralisation was considered to be hosted by finely crystalline, apparently low temperature quartz and quartz sulfide veins in associated silicification. Ian Matheson, who worked for North, and Mel Jones, who worked for Pancon and various others, considered this to be similar to the Henty gold deposit in Tasmania. And the grades, particularly the higher grades, do show some similarities as far as they were concerned to what you would actually expect to see at Henty. However, that was basically about the end of the story. Even though another 12 holes were drilled by North Broken Hills Division EZ at the time, all they came up with was a possible resource of about 100 to 200,000 tonnes of 2 to 3 grams. And at that time, in the late 80s, that wasn't considered to be significant enough. And pretty much the project started to fall apart at that time. One of the interesting reports is one written by Matheson, who actually tries to put the geology together in 1990 based on that 20 previous years of exploration. And it's interesting, to quote that, you can see that he's noted that several geologists with a wide range of skills worked on the project. There was a lack of continuity, a disjointed, anomaly-driven series of exploration programs. They had many other anomalies besides the WL area to actually try, and sometimes they went away from it for 2 to 3 years. There isn't a report that actually tries to assess the whole area, and even though they didn't like the map at Gould, no other regional map is actually available. So you can see that the project actually suffered from what I would call potentially poor science. Subsequent to that, in the last 30 years, the tenement's been held, the area's been held by a number of people, CRA, Nicolago, Golden Cross, Tri-Origin, which morphed into Tri-Osmium and is now currently Heron, before Sky came through to actually drill some holes. So you've actually had a gap of about 32 years between the last drilling done by North Broken Hill, EZ, and the work that Sky has done, which, you know, the drilling has immediately intersected what I would call value in the shallow. But what do I mean by value in the shallow? Well, it came about when I saw this proposal for this 10x CRC, which I've classified as the core of the deep. The total project's a bit difficult to tell how much money is going to be spent over the next 10 years. It seems to be in the order of somewhere between $100 and $150 million is going to be spent by the CRC itself, but also the surveys and a number of other companies. When you actually look at what they intend to do, well, it's all about drilling. And when you talk about drilling, it's basically because they basically believe that the top 100 metres in Australia is unprospective. There aren't any more ore bodies to be found in that area. So we actually need to develop techniques to actually see deeper than that. And part of that is actually based on work that Richard Shoddy has done. And they've looked at where the depth of cover is actually getting greater in Australia. However, when you actually look at our exploration in Australia, you actually start to notice that we're still pretty much stuck at what Richard actually calls the shallow end of the swimming pool. In fact, he predicts that the average depth to discovery by about 2050 will be about 90 metres of cover that we'll actually be drilling through. Although cover is a bit of a difficult concept to actually come up with in a good definition. And I would still consider that to be relatively shallow. The problem that I actually have is that these data are actually extremely skewed. So rather than actually looking at the average value, we're probably actually better off looking at the median value. And I haven't actually got Richard's data, and I'll tap him on the shoulder when I ask for it. But I reckon the median depth of discovery will actually be quite a lot less, probably in the order of 20 to 30 metres. Where we are able to get some of Richard's data when we're actually looking at cumulative distributions, you can actually see that the data is actually quite skewed. But the interesting thing, even though these data are actually quite old compared to that last one, you can see that when it comes to gold globally, the average depth of discovery is 41 metres. If you look at the median or the midpoint, you can see that basically 51% or half discoveries are still sticking out of the ground. If we look at copper, the average depth is about 132 metres. But if we actually look at this midpoint or this median, we actually start seeing that the depth is actually only in the order of about 20 metres. So I would argue that we don't actually need to jump into the deep end of the swimming pool or develop techniques to see that deep at this stage. We're quite comfortable maybe for another generation perhaps in actually exploiting the top 100 metres and finding discoveries in that area. So is it well explored? Well, if not, how do we do it better? I mentioned this concept to one of the guys from Geoscience Australia a couple of years ago, and he just said, well, if you're not finding things in the top 100 metres, well, that's just poor science, isn't it? And I reflected on it, and I wish I'd been able to come back with a really comeback at the time, because I would have now answered, yes, it's exploration. Exploration is not a science. Exploration is a business. Geology is the science we use for that. So maybe we need to actually reapply some of our science to actually start, geochemically, which is my bent, shall we say, reassaying things and really interpreting geological data, geochemical data in a more sensible and structured geological, geophysical, and looking at the structural geology in particular, a better framework rather than just thinking that maybe we need to abandon the top 100 metres and start drilling towards the moho. So, I mean, I like using Uber as an example. Maybe we need to be disruptive rather than disrupting. And disrupting means creating a problem. And I think if we start drilling deep, we're actually only going to just create problems for ourselves. So, Jess, I think this is the last slide. So I'm going to come in hopefully under time. So, I see an incredible amount of value in the shallow. I do actually own a farm, so I'd love to have a tractor, and I'd love to have something like this one with the auger. I don't know about the crane coming over the top of the cab without rollover protection, but anyway. I think the Minex CRC, the idea that we need to develop techniques to drill deep is probably a generation too early, maybe in 25 years' time, but I think we need to shake out the first 100 metres before we worry about going too deep. When you actually look at the justification for that and using Richard Shoddy's data and actually look at it in a different way, you actually start to see that maybe this idea we need to go deep at this stage is probably a little bit premature. And look, I'm quite happy that my exploration is poor science. If we can actually replace that with what I call astute exploration, which basically means integrating the best of our geology, geophysics, structure and geochemistry, then I think we'll start to see more intersections like what Sky found at Cullinan start to fall out. And that will be all. Thanks very much, Jess.
I've got Adam as well putting his hand up, so I'll just unmute. Hey, Adam, you can talk.
Hey, Mark, how you going?
I'm well. Thanks very much, Adam, for dobbing me in for this as well.
No problem. Just a thank you for that. I would say I concur as well about the value in the shallow. I really agree with that. I think there's still plenty of things to find. But a specific question I had just about your 94 metre intercept. I noticed there's a very low recovery in that 94 metres. Is it because it's on a fault zone or a shear zone, or what's the reason for that low recovery?
Oh, look, it's still a bit of a work in progress. One of the things that we've found with the follow-up drilling is that basically we've mudded up. The guys were probably underprepared. There's quite a lot of, shall we say, clay alteration that we're starting to see now coming through. And we believe that was probably washed away by the original drilling. Now, whether we're showing a fault on the cross-section, we believe that mineralisation is probably actually very proximal to that fault. The actual composition and how bad it is, we'll have a much better idea with one of the holes that we'll be drilling, if you like, is a proximal follow-up to hole 2.
Thanks.
I'm still muted. There we go. Thank you so much, Mark. I think that's, we have one more come through. So we've got a minute left, so if that's okay. Why is the McPhillamy style deposit underexplored in New South Wales? Is there a bias to the, I don't even know these words. Okay. Ordovician.
Ordovician. Well done, Jess.
Ordovician? Porphyry.
Ordovician. Yes, there is a bias towards the Ordovician porphyries. I think McPhillamys is not recognised as a significant large deposit, which is fine. We're quite happy about that. The Henty deposit, I think, is probably akin. If I was to say that there was a family of these type of deposits, I'd probably chuck Mount Lyell in as well. I think that's a copper-rich N member, basically, which did have significant gold associated with it initially with the mining of the Iron Blow. I think it's a really interesting thing when you look at a map and you see a lot of drill holes and you think, oh, well, this whole thing's been drilled out. When you start looking at what's been assayed, it's only been copper, lead, zinc. We've found that a lot of the gold assaying may actually have been sludge samples rather than pore samples. And if we're really lucky, they've actually done something like, I'd call it filleting or grinding, where they may be taken about 1/20th of pore off the edge over a 3 or 6 metre intersection. So we're finding a lot of drill holes that have never been cut. So that's where the opportunity is in these sort of systems, and finding the right style of alteration and then targeting that cutting and actually analysing for gold. But the reality was in the 1970s, gold was 35 US an ounce. So there wasn't exactly the analysis of gold at that time barely paid for what you could possibly recover out of it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for taking the time to answer those questions as well. So I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure, Jess.